Hello everyone, welcome to HIM 216. We are continuing our lectures for Chapter 6, and I know that you love this chapter. We'll have at least probably 4 to 6 more lectures for this chapter as we really get into the meat of coding with ICD-10. In your textbook, please turn to page 120. And what I would like for you to notice here is that initially we began discussing the PCS coding guidelines. Now, we're going to go into those guidelines, and I want to remind you that anytime we're using the integrated codebook, the electronic codebook, we are going to click on this number 10. And when we do that, we will be opening up the ICD-10 electronic codebook or the e-codebook. To code in the procedural coding system, we click on the Procedure tab. And I want to remind you that if we click on the Help tab, we can get to the documents that are relevant to the procedural coding system, and I'm going to click on the guidelines. Now, these are the guidelines that went into effect October 1 of 2015. They're the 2016 official guidelines for coding and reporting. They are in effect until this October 1, when the new guidelines will go into effect. And we have been under a coding change moratorium, so we expect a lot of coding changes this fall. And of course, when those guidelines come out, I will demonstrate those guidelines for you. This is the table of contents, and you'll see that in your book, this corresponds to what is in your book. And what we're going to be going over in this chapter are the conventions, the medical surgical section guidelines. The obstetrical section guidelines are in Chapter 7, and actually the new technology section guidelines are not covered in this textbook, but the selection of the principal diagnosis those guidelines are actually on page 99 and the top of 100 in this chapter in your textbook. You can see, in your book, if you'll turn to page 122, you can see that the conventions correspond to what is in your textbook. The conventions are A1 through A11, and that's what we're going to cover in this lecture. Then we'll have several lectures that cover the medical and surgical section, which generally is related to the root operations. So we have the rest of our guideline lectures for this chapter will be related to B. But I also wanted to take you down, and I want to show you, we'll go over the obstetric guidelines in the next chapter. This is the new technology section. As a new graduate, I would not expect you at all to be coding a new technology. This is typically done in large teaching centers, centers that do a lot of research. And so these codes, which I'll begin with an X, and we'll look at those in a minute, they are standalone codes. They're not supplemental codes. They represent specific procedures that are described in that code title. You don't need any additional codes from any other sections of PCS. The X code contains a title which describes a specific new technology procedure. and only that Xcode gets reported for the procedure. There is no need for any additional coding from PCS. And the example that they have here is a code for the introduction of ceftazidime avibactam anti-infective. It's an anti-infective. It's a medication that gets introduced into a central vein percutaneous approach. It goes to New Technology Group 1. You would not have a separate code from Table 3E0, which is the administration section code, if you were using this code. So New Technology codes stand on their own. All right, let me close that and go back to procedures. While we're talking about new technology, let me demonstrate for you. You can see that new technology is its own distinct section. And you can see that for body systems, we can either choose cardiovascular, joints, or anatomic region. I'm going to choose anatomic region. Our root operation is introduction. If we look at that, this is putting in or on a therapeutic, diagnostic, nutritional, prophylactic substance, except blood or blood products. We're going to choose introduction, and then our options here are either is this substance being introduced via the peripheral vein or the central vein. The approach for these is always percutaneous, and then you can see that we actually have 4 different substances here that can be infused, and you'll see that the qualifier is New Technology Group 1. If we chose cardiovascular system, extirpation, our root operation would be extirpation, which is taking or cutting out a solid matter from a body. Then you'll notice here we have the coronary arteries by the number of sites. The approach is percutaneous, and we only have one device or substance or technology, and that's an orbital arthrectomy technology. So that's technology as opposed to a substance or a device, and this also groups to New Technology Group 1. If we choose joints, we have monitoring, and monitoring, the definition for this root operation is determining the level of function repetitively over a period of time, and our options here are either the knee joint left or the knee joint right, and this is a knee replacement sensor. And so I honestly am not familiar with this, but just from looking at it, it looks to me like this is a device that they can implant that can help them determine whether or not the patient is a good candidate for, or if it is a point in time when that knee should be replaced. So really fascinating, very interesting, something you may never actually work with if you're not in a facility that actually works with that type of technology. As we go through these guidelines, we're actually going to be practicing different assigning codes. That's one of the reasons that we will be spending probably at least 3 lectures going over those particular codes. In your textbook, I want you to turn to page 122, and this is the beginning of the discussion of the guidelines for PCS. And one of the important things that you need to know is the codes are 7 characters. They're always 7 characters. Every code is 7 characters. Within PCS, we do not use the letter I or the letter O because they can be confused with the number 1 and the number 0. So when you are typing in codes as part of your homework, you will never use the letter, actually that's not an I, that's an L. I apologize. We will not use the letter L or the letter 0 And so don't use a 0. I mean, an O. I know it is so confusing. It still confuses me. We will not use the letter O. We will use the number 0. And so I always try to make sure that I say 0 as opposed to O when I'm lecturing. But if I ever slip up and I say O, know that I mean 0. Also look at A6. These others you can read. Number 6 tells you that the alphabetical index, this is our alphabetical index. The alphabet, because I put A there so we can get more of a view. This index helps you locate the code in the table. You actually must go to a table typically to get a complete and accurate code. Now, of course, you'll see down here under abortion, we have 3 complete codes. I would still click on those to look at those and validate that yes, that is actually the code that I need. But for other codes, it sends you to a table. For instance, if we do abortion products of conception, it sends you to an obstetrics table. Let's look at abdominoplasty. And we're going to choose alteration. This is a tummy tuck, basically, because of the root operation alteration. And it sends you to the table. Once you get here, you have to choose the approach and you have to choose the device. So typically with tables, it will give you at least the first 3 characters, sometimes the first 4. If we go down here and look at acetabulectomy, you'll notice it is only taking us to table 0QB. That's the table, 0QB. And you'll notice that then we have to fill in the body part and we have to fill in the approach. The device is completed for us because there's only one option, and then we would choose the qualifier. So when you see these shorter codes, that's the table that the classification system is sending you to, and you have to fill it in. So if you get a question that says, what table are you going to use? It's referring to these first 3 or 4 characters that you find in the alphabetical index and that you click on, and then you choose the additional characters that you need to complete that code. It's also important to note that you do not have to consult the alphabetical index before you use the table. You can code straight from a table. And so if I know that my patient had coronary artery bypass surgery, I can code that directly from the table, and it's easier for me to do that than maybe to try and go through the index. And I'm just going to choose autologous venous tissue and coronary artery. And of course you have to have all 7 characters, and I'm just kind of going down through. I just covered A6 and A7. Now I want to talk about A9. I want you to look on page 123 at this table. And I want you to look at code, and you'll notice that in your textbook, it has this is similar format. This is how the tables are actually formatted in a paper book. So you can see that the section, the body system, and the operation are listed above. Those 3 characters are listed above the table from which you must choose the remaining 4 characters. So the paper book is structured just like the ebook. So I'm going to clear this, and I'm actually going to go to table 0JH. And you can follow along if you would like. So 0JH. Now, they have asked that we look at 0JH T3VZ. T. And look what happens. I choose T, everything grays out. If I look in approach, I have open and percutaneous available to me. And I want you to look at the top of page 123. And I want you to notice that this table has a line going through it. We have the section above the line and below the line. Below the line, corresponding to approach, we have 0 and 3. And that's what we have in this table. For device, we have 1, 3, and V. And if you'll look in this table, the only thing that's highlighted is 1, 3, and V. And then Z is highlighted because that is the only qualifier. So by choosing subcutaneous tissue, by choosing T, I'm limiting my options for the approach and the device. In your textbook, the actual paper code book accomplishes the same thing by putting a line in the table, and you cannot cross those lines. So as we look at this code that they want us to look at, the code 0JH T3VZ, that is a valid code. Those were the options available to us when we coded this. So let's say at our table 0JH, they want us to look at W. They want us to look at body part W, and then choose 3VZ. Can we do it? No, we cannot. It's grayed out. That's not an option. But look in your book. W, the body part of W, is in the first part of that table. And you'll notice that the approaches available are 0 and 3. And that's the same in the top of the table as it is this bottom part. The devices are 1 and 3. The only place where we have a device V available is attached to body part T in the lower part of that table. So we cannot. So the code A9, it says, is 0JHW3VZ a valid code. No, it is not, because we cannot go below that line in the book to pull the Z up and use it with W. Device V can only be used with body part T. And we can see in our book that V is just not an option. It's grayed out. So your question for this lecture is, I want you to look at code 0JH S0VZ. Is that a valid code? 0JH S0VZ. Is that a valid code? Okay. Now on to page 123. A10. This is the same as ICD-10-CM, and it is used as and or. So and can be and or. And A11. This tells you that there are many terms within the PCS system. There are specific definitions for those. We can find those when we go into the Help tab and go to the PCS manuals, but physicians are not expected to use those terms or really even to know what the definitions of those terms are. It would be completely inappropriate to query a physician and ask him to correlate his documentation with the PCS definitions. That would be entirely inappropriate. And it gives you an example here. When the physician documents partial resection, the coder can independently correlate partial resection to the root operation of excision. You do not have to query the physician and ask him if his partial resection is in fact equivalent to an excision. That would be entirely appropriate. And actually, many physicians will document that they performed an excision, and when you read that operative report, you realize that the procedure they have performed meets the definition of the root operation of resection. So you have to learn the terms and the root operations, and we don't query the physicians and expect them to document to those terms. So this is going to conclude this is lecture 6 for chapter 6, and that will conclude this first lecture for this week.